Hey everybody, we're just waiting for folks to file in a little bit, but I think I'll get started. So this will be the last of the Sunday sessions, as I made note a little earlier on my post. Just a busy time trying to get more organized and got to make more stuff. But as all the other ones that we recorded, they're on. Some of them are on Instagram TV because Instagram changed the way these live things get filed. So you can look back at Instagram TV, but we also put them on my YouTube channel, and I think it's just Jarrod Dahl. So they're all there except for some of the early forging ones we lost because we didn't know how to save to our camera roll. So today we're going to talk about locking lidded boxes, or just lidded boxes in general, and a little bit of the backdrop. I don't normally remember dates very well, except for my anniversary maybe, but even my birthday I have a hard time remembering sometimes. And so I looked back through my camera feed, photo feed, to see when I first started wood turning on the pole lathe. And it was back in 2009. And concentrated mainly on wooden bowls to go with the wooden spoons that I was carving and selling at farmers markets and craft shows. And that time, I believe Facebook was still a major place for sharing information. I guess it still is, but I don't participate in Facebook anymore. But there was a great forum, green woodworking, spoon carving, green woodworking in Sloyd it was called. And back in those early days, you know, it was a really cool place. Actually, when I got started, there wasn't Facebook. There was a forum called the Bodgers Ask and Answer, and it was part of the Association of Pole Lathe Turners in the UK. And that forum was great. There was all kinds of, logged and archived question and answer, kind of old school forum style stuff. And that's when I first was exploring the pole lathe turning. And of course, back then, Robin Wood was the man. There were a few others kind of practicing at the time, Sean Hellman, and a few others, but Robin really was the main pole lathe turner. His book had just come out on the history of wooden bowl in England, and I got a copy of that and looked at all of his YouTube videos over and over and over again. Living in northern Wisconsin, there's just no way to learn that kind of stuff. Self-taught. By watching as many videos as I could, and maybe Ben Orford was putting videos out at the time too. I remember watching a few of his, but that was it. There wasn't really much going on in the pole lathe scene back then, compared to now. It's still small, but so that was 2009, and developed forging tools. I had been blacksmithing for many years before that, so I was able to forge tools, build the lathe. I built timber frame homes and things, so I made this rickety affair, and not knowing if I was going to like it, I tried making wooden bows and fantasized about making money doing it, and I made a lot of kids' bows. And anybody who's in the bowyer world knows when you make kids' bows, you're taking too much material off at a time, going way too fast. It wasn't for me. And so I wasn't sure if pole lathe turning was going to be for me either. So I built this kind of bolted together lathe out of scrap timber and started turning. And I remember, those that know me, pretty calm guy, and in frustration, I probably have only thrown something maybe once or twice in my entire life, And that first time turning a bowl on the pole lathe by myself with no direction, and those that have done this know how hard and frustrating it is. If you've taken classes from me or from someone else, it's so nice to have someone there at least just show you how to hold the tool, even though a split second you might forget and start grabbing. I had no tutor or mentor, and I threw the bowl across the room and gave up. I still have that. I did finish it. It's here somewhere. You saw it, Jasmine. It's a basswood bowl.
I put all the ugly bowls in a box.
And it has this really, really poor shape, and I couldn't undercut the core, which is, the big challenge when you start is just getting that core severed. And I couldn't undercut it, so I think I chiseled it off and then just carved it with my hook knife. And I should have dug it out, actually. But I decided not to give up, and being maybe a little stubborn, that helped, and I kept turning, and things got easier. And with more practice, developed an eye and technique on where to and how to make those cuts with those hooks, pumping along. And at the time, I was being very inspired by a lot of the Swedish ale bowls and Swedish style turning that my friend Jim Sanurud was doing. He's a Minnesotan and a wood turner and cabinet maker, chair designer now, more than turning, but Jim really was an inspiration to me, and he'd spent time with Vila Sundqvist, and he was a teacher. I never have turned with Jim, and so hopefully someday we'll fix that. But he was turning these Norwegian ale bowls and having them painted by some of the top rose maulers in the northern Midwest. And through all that, maybe he turned a lidded box, or I don't remember, but he tipped me off to this book by Svenning Svenningsen about a history of turning in a region of Västergötland in the southern Sweden, I guess you'd say. That's Sweden. This little brown area here is this turning region. And when he was traveling over there, he had met up with this guy Svenning. They were having some meeting, and there was another guy, maybe some of you know him. He's got long blonde hair. He's kind of a biker dude, skinny guy, but he's a pole lathe turner at that time. I met him on Facebook, turning some of this historic stuff. And Jim tipped me up to this book, and my friend from North Carolina, Joe Dolores, I think, was the one who helped me get this book. So thanks, Joe, if you're listening or watching. And this was the inspiration I needed to go further in exploring these boxes. I was really fascinated because all of this turning is really greenwood turning. And so how do you make a locking lidded box, or a lidded box even, out of greenwood and not have it warp so that the lid doesn't fit? You have two different pieces of wood warping differently. It's like, it was a mind-blowing thing for me to imagine. Eventually, I tried a few out of just really large diameter, but still side grain, so the rings were like this through the box, hoping that it wouldn't warp too much on the rim. I experimented with taking rims, the lids, and turning them upside down in the different grain orientations so that the warp would match lid and base. It never really worked out very good. And in 2014, I went to Sweden for their one and only spoon carving event called Hedfest. It was in Linköping, I think. And after that, I think Barn and I were the foreigners there, and I ended up traveling to Borås and Göteborg to do some talks on birch bark canoe building and talk about my craft and whatnot, and also get to the museum archives. And so for 2014, I met Svenning, and he took me around to some private collections, which I documented and wrote about on my blog. You know, this would have been, a few years ago now. You could search for it if you want to read that stuff. Got to look at the old museum pieces, and finally understood what was going on, which was very simple, but I didn't quite figure it out until I saw them. But all the grain orientation of these boxes are what we would call vertical grain. So the rings are standing on edge, and so it means that they were taken out of very large diameter trees to get those rings standing up. And then that allows the wood to dry, but it only dries in one direction, sideways. It doesn't warp along the rim because there's no end grain section. Like a tangential bowl, there is end grain section, but it doesn't warp along the rim. And so you have a flat rim, it just turns oval a little bit. And so then you can fit two ovals together and then turn them, and then they lock in a kind of a cam action. And pretty much all of the boxes, and I saw hundreds and hundreds of them, were all oriented the same way. And in that area, from what I found out from Sven, there was a small scale manufacturing for 200-300 years. Lots of boxes and bowls, spoons, and also ribbon and different things that were being woven and exported out of the region in the numbers of like 20,000 bowls, 30,000 spools of ribbon. This is pretty impressive for maybe 1,000 turning families producing this quantity, and it was all mostly beech. And there was huge beech forests there and not very good farming, and so that's why they were allowed to produce and sell this woodenware instead of farm, which was the main occupation. So it was all exported out of the region, and they kept good records for that, and so in the book they talk a lot about the numbers and the quantities. So when I was there with Sven, he took me to a very prestigious antique dealer's place, and I found this box, which, I was with the leading expert on these boxes, and so he dated this to like mid 1700s. And I may have paid $300 for it or more, but I knew I couldn't pass it up. It's amazing to think of this box as older than the United States, technically.
Can you point out the oval?
Someone asking that?
No, I'm asking.
This one isn't as oval.
Mm-hmm.
The lid is slightly oval. And not all this stuff was turned completely green. If you can imagine felling a tree that's 2 feet diameter, bucking it up into pieces, some of it's going to dry and you're still going to turn it dry. And so visiting Borås, it really changed my perspective on what I call craft production or production work. It's not mass production in the sense that we know it today with large industrial infrastructures. These are small scale production by handcraft individuals working with their hands and hand tools, foot-powered lathes, small looms in the case of the weaving. And it really helped me to accept the possibility that I could be content making handmade one-off objects, but in a sort of production mindset where I make a similar style over and over and over again. They're all slightly different, and not trying too hard to make them perfectly, but aesthetically within the same sort of category, so I could sell them on the website as one object. So it was a pivotal point for me going there and looking at these things made in mass. And through the years, you can find different styles of boxes. And they talk about it in the book a little bit, about just changing markets or trends. You know, this was, you know, so 1700s versus this one is, you know, 1800s, or, you know, this is, well, late 1800s. So, and there's another style that I went to study in 2017 when I went over to teach a class, in a way to reintroduce pole lathe turning to Sweden, because at the time I think there's only one person, Daniel Lundberg, doing it, and we built a bunch of lathes. Anders Lindberg and I and Daniel and a few other people organized a turning workshop where we turned mostly bowls. I don't think anybody was ready for locking lidded boxes, but we got to study a collection in Skara, a nearby town, and this style of box with the sort of the tenon lid instead of the open, the tenon base. It's a tenon lid. And this I actually made in Japan when I traveled and taught how to make these at Tomio Imaru's school in Fukushima. And so, you know, that's pretty cool stuff.
So it fits because you've twisted the ovals together, right?
Right, yeah.
And so the lid doesn't fall off.
Right, the
stays on.
Slightly oval vertical grain, the ovals fit, then you turn and it locks. And with these you can undercut this one isn't undercut very much, but you can undercut that tenon and make sure that your inside of your box is hollow concave, and so that it'll bind in, that will bind in on that rim and lock. And the locking lidded box, I bought this at an antique market, like a junk shop, with my friend Ramon Persson, a mentor, woodworking mentor as well. We went looking, and I think I got this for $40. Really amazing antique. And so I went on to make a bunch of these and sold them to some friends and, you know, other patrons and customers. And they use them for like lunch boxes and stuff like that. But the cool thing about this is it has this groove here and here, and the way the rim is set up, you slide that into the groove. This notch allows the lid to go down level, and then because they're two ovals, it'll lock and turn as well.
And there's a little mark where you can see where they line up to open it.
Yeah. This one, when I got this, I think I actually slept with it. It's like, yeah. And I think you go back into my Instagram feed from those days. I think that's when I just started with Instagram, was during that trip. And so there's some pictures of this stuff way back, if you can mind scrolling. So later on, I tried to develop a little bit more modern designs. So I made this two-tiered box, which was common. Actually, I got that triple one.
Oh
upstairs.
yeah, where is that?
We should go get it. It's sitting.
I haven't seen it in a while.
Yeah, when I'm turning, maybe you can go get it.
All right.
I had made a triple one as well, like like some of the ones I saw in the collections that I visited. And again, they're probably on my blog from those early days there. I don't know if I can find one off the top.
There, well,
And
it
then
looks
there's a
kind of like
triple.
that one. There
This
you go.
one would be three layers. And the main question is what did they use these for? Svenning said that a lot of times these bigger ones were used for keeping receipts and important papers. And we have to remember this is 1700s, 1800s, where we didn't have a standard size piece of paper. Probably important receipts were probably very small, so you could keep that in there. And these mainly were like just jewelry boxes or trinket boxes that you may maybe the men bought for their ladies.
Someone asked when did they start being made?
I don't know exactly.
1700s, perhaps?
The 1600s to 1800s, depending on how you roll the century thing. I think Europeans and Americans run it differently, but and earlier than that, 1700s, probably in the 1500s. Pole lathes were the turning machine. Well before the Middle Ages. 1000 AD or even earlier than that. So they go back to the Middle East, 3000 BC. So I don't know what the earliest turned object is in Sweden, but I went on to make these trying to
Show
make
the
these
bottom
more
of the-
modern. I will
Okay.
modern designs, and trying to come up with something new and fresh. I think this is the only one like this I ever made though. But other people went on to make very interesting lunch boxes and stuff. There's a Turner in France, I think, that's doing similar, and I forget his name. Sorry if you're watching. Gary Baker maybe. But I modified the notch so instead of locking it around, it just goes straight down and then turns. It just works a little bit better. Same with this, so it's just a little bit easier. So I've since gravitated to that type of mechanism instead of the old style. I made this one. I shot photos for my book, and again, it has two notches so that it just works better. I still have to adjust that, but so let's get into the lathe room, and I'll start turning these and show you guys how to do it and some of the tricks. So, yeah, and as you guys know, ask questions, Jasmine will field the questions. And for those of you who are watching that might be beginners, I'm probably not going to cover any of the beginning stuff when it comes to the turning. You can go back and watch some of the recorded stuff when I'm turning a bowl, or even an end grain cup. I would classify this as more advanced turning. So if you like end grain, if you can't turn without catching, I wouldn't try turning these. Just turn more bowls, get used to the hooks, and then move on. You'll save yourself a lot of frustration. So I have this wood that I fetched outside, and I think you want to come in a little bit more, Jasmine. The grain is like this. So to make this type of box, you're gonna need a really big tree, because the center of the tree, you know, is here. The outside of the tree is here. So the whole tree is this big. And there's lots of ways you can cut, split, or I use a chainsaw and I rip down the pieces. So the lid is the same. It's not necessarily from right above the box body. It's just another piece from the same part of the tree. But again, the grain orientation is very much the same. And so any warping is going to happen when you have some curvature in the ring. Technically it looks like this. Can you see that from that angle? So you're going to get a little more warping on this here than on this side where it's more vertical. But overall it tends to not matter so much on the large body of the box. It matters more on the lid. None of the lids on any of those boxes are completely true. It's nearly impossible. But they're true enough that they can lock. You know, they wiggle a little bit. It's just not important.
Someone asked if the wood is really fresh or is it partially dried?
This particular wood is fairly fresh. It was felled last October and left in large form. So I could put the moisture meter on it. It's probably quite high, probably in the high 20s. Yeah, it's 26%, so that's up there.
And can this be turned on a regular electric lathe?
You can, yes, but you'll need to get some tools for hollow form. Most hollow forms that I know of are turned end grain, and so it's a little tricky to turn side grain hollow forms. I have turned a handful of boxes with the electric lathe, but I've turned the speed way down, and I'm using the same technique as I use on this, which my hooks are upside down, and I'm going in reverse.
What would be a good first project using tangential wood? Maybe a box with a tenon?
Well, tangential wood is half of a tree, so a bowl is the first project.
That was Mary.
Mary, you know this already.
And then she asked if these were end grain.
No, they're side grain. I'll draw it on the board, just to relieve any confusion here. I have some more chalk, but I lost it.
It's there on the corner.
Where?
Bottom left.
Oh. Right, so big diameter. What I usually do is cut or split it in half. Cut it in quarters. And then here you're going to have those more arced rings. So the larger diameter tree, the better. Or turn smaller boxes for the diameter as well. You want those rings to be vertical as possible, so you're going to make a cut here, and you know, I would stay away from this curvy bit. So when you turn that up, it's, you know, slightly, and so, and then your lid, you know, here it starts to slope away, so usually I would cut here and make the lid in there, or another box. this angled stuff isn't so good. Maybe you need to make another cut with your chainsaw right here, and then you can get another box. So you end up with little bits, but you use that for spoons and stuff. So it's still tangential. It's just oriented in a vertical grain or quarter sawn orientation. Whereas a bowl is just half the log, right? And this outer circumference warps the most, so it pulls down. This little bit here doesn't warp as much, so it stays, and that's why those rims like this. But in this orientation, the wood is just shrinking in this direction. Well, the arrows are pointing the wrong way. It just goes, and it doesn't warp any other way. Shrinks a little bit this way, mostly this way. So, bowls first. Then get yourself some big diameter, and then you could turn these. And I wouldn't say the locking lid, I would say the friction fit would be the first thing. So I'm going to do a little axe work just to save myself some turning. And of course I use the bandsaw to bandsaw this out. If you don't have one, you can use the axe. And I need to pay attention to where my lid is going to be. So I want to make sure that I don't make it too domed, overly domed. Chopping boards, got something underneath it here. So you can see I'm kind of trying to work, trying to cut cross grain as much as possible. So the grain is running this way, long ways, and so the more my axe is parallel, the more efficient the cut's going to be. And that pure end grain section here, where the grain meets the shape, is the hardest to cut. So I'll cut around and save it for last, reducing the amount of that end grain. It's not really end grain, it's a kind of vague term. When we're carving completely perpendicular to the end grain, it's more accurate.
What axe is that?
This is a Santa Yarva, I believe. Any axe that's sharp will do the job. So mandrel size, there's some gearing issues. Larger the mandrel, the more torque. Less speed per pump. Smaller mandrel, more speed, less torque. We're going to want to go a quarter, roughly 1 to 4, maybe 1 to 5 at the most, and not less than 1 1/4 because it'll just bog down. If you're turning plates, it's different. Usually, I have a compass in here. I do have a scratcher. Here's a little trick. Depending on the type of mandrel you have, if you scratch a larger diameter, you can look down the shaft of the mandrel and you can see that scratched circle and line it up. And when I'm using a spike mandrel, I like to give it a second or two to let the wood compress around those spikes. Depending on what kind of wood, if you're doing beech, it's going to be really important, really prone to splitting. American beech anyway. Can't say I've turned European beech, but.
Can you elaborate on how plates are different?
Because the cutting on plates are mostly it's the angle of the cut. You're not hollowing, so you don't need torque. You're cutting with your hook across the grain more, and so it's way more of efficient cuts. And so you can get away with a higher speed, smaller mandrel than a larger mandrel, more torque. You just don't need it. So in fact, I prefer higher speed with plates. It just gets it winging quite fast. You just don't need the torque, that's why. If you're making something deep, then you'd probably want the torque anytime you're hollowing. So hopefully that mandrel will work for me. And at some point we could just clamp that, Jasmine. You can wander off. And
get the three-lidded one.
Water the garden.
I can't answer people's questions then.
I know. I'm just teasing.
Go sunbathing?
Sunbathing. It's not that good yet. But. So before I wrap my drive strap on, I'm just gonna find center. I want that mandrel to spin as perfectly as possible. I think I pointed that out last time. I can't stress it enough. When you're beginning, it's quite hard, but it's one of the most important things you can do to ensure that your connection between mandrel and what you're turning doesn't move. If I get halfway done and this moves, then I have to return the entire surface again. And if that connection is loose and moving all the time while I'm turning, you'll never get a good cut. And where's my hammer?
No.
You'll never get a good cut, and it'll just be a nightmare to try to turn. And try to troubleshoot is really tricky. So I'd say like no more than an 1/8 dip, if you can. And I have this sharpened Phillips screwdriver that I use to kind of pre-drill. Then I wrap the drive strap. Remember last time the wedges weren't quite working well, Jasmine, so you want to be cautious. Although the humidity is more stable than last time.
It's gonna blow out.
I'll keep an eye on it.
Give me a black eye.
So the outside is going to be treated just like a bowl. On the lower half, I'm going to flatten it, put a foot, go deeper so that there's a little nub. Work with the shape. You know, this middle area will be the same as like a rim of a bowl. And then you flip it around and then you do the same thing. So Jasmine will bounce around, answer questions, and we try to get some good shots of the tool working. But again, we're not going to focus too much on the cutting technique because it's in the other video really well. We'll focus on some. I don't want to talk too much about the basic techniques because I'm just assuming that you all already know how to do that. So, slightly advanced project for those who already have experience. You'll learn a lot just by watching. What did we turn last week? The logbook?
I think so. Are you going to make a finished box?
Am I going to make a finished box? Yes.
We might be here for 5 hours, but
No, we'll be able to do it in 2 parts. The first part's almost over already.
Yep.
Maybe part of a 3rd part. It'll be the last one, so.
Is that maple?
This is silver maple, yeah. So let me just talk about the platform a little bit. Can you see behind me? I have 2 rods coming out of this piece that's bolted to the concrete. So I can adjust just by moving them around. And then I'm standing on this platform here to help align my hips. I'm running the drive strap right through because that applies the most power, and for bowl turning, probably more historically accurate as well, just it has more power. There's plenty of diagrams or artist drawings of pole lathe turners turning bowls, not spindles. The drive strap goes down. But I needed to move a little bit to the side, so instead of like being really wide stanced, I just moved the pedal. So there's still some axe marks there, so I'm going to go down a little bit more. Oops. It's a new tool, it's a little bit aggressive in spots. slightly hollow bottom so it sits nice on the table.
What is the best wood for boxes?
It's what?
The best wood for boxes.
The biggest wood you can get. So I'm kind of gauging I have a new tool here. Anytime you're working on the rim, it's important to drop your tool way below center so you get a good skew. So still a little bit of bandsaw mark there. Watch the time.
Yeah, it's 49 minutes.
What?
49 minutes.
Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm establishing the diameter, getting below the bandsaw mark, and then I can decide on the proportions of the box. If I don't know diameter and I commit too early, I might have proportions that look a little funny. So until I can really see what I have to work with, I don't want to commit. Oop. If you can, are you focusing right in on the hook? So this hook has no taper before it's scrolled, so I can get a really nice finish cut if I run it almost vertical on that little ledge. And I can get a more aggressive cut by turning it away. This would be a complete catch. So we're looking at, from that ledge, that's an arc, wherever we place the tool, we want to deviate off of that maybe 10 degrees. Give or take, depending on the shape of your hook. I talk about how pole lathe turning makes you a cyborg?
No, you haven't.
Well, it's true. We control the machine with our thoughts. So pole lathe turners are the first cyborgs. I want to go slow, I go slow. I want the machine to speed up. Maybe potters, I guess, were cyborgs too. It's a fun way of looking at it. We have long winters here in northern Wisconsin. Think of strange things. Yeah, I got most of it. I'll leave a little bit of the bandsaw mark there. And I can always turn it back around, so I'm going to flip it. Time?
Oh, yeah, 53 minutes. You want to start a new one?
Yeah, I might as well.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll shut it down and we'll just fire it back up again once it's loaded or whatever it does. I'm going to keep turning, same as before. I won't plunge in until I won't get there in time. So.
Somebody asked a question. When you say no taper, do you mean no, no taper in thickness or in width of the hook?
In width.
Okay. Okay, goodbye, and...
We'll be back in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll save.